Welcome to New World Geopolitics. This is the February 29th Frontline update for the Russo-Ukraine war. There is a lot to talk about once again. And the Russians have seized several more settlements and are in the process of consolidating those gains. So we are going to dive into the Frontline update and discuss things relatively quickly. We have already talked about much of the issues with Ukraine's Donbass defense. So after the quick Frontline update, we're going to talk more about some possibilities for the war, Ukraine and Russian politics, if we get time, and then some interesting things going on with NATO. So first, we'll dive right into the situation west of Avdiivka. Ukrainian forces are pulling out of Orlivka, as well as Berdychi. According to some sources, Russian army yesterday actually entered Berdychi first, and this is what caused a chain rout of Orlivka as well. Maybe that is just a rumor or speculation, can't say for certain, but reports indicated Ukrainian forces are falling back to Semenivka. But the chance, or based on the current state of the battlefield, the chances of the Ukrainians holding on to Semenivka for very long seems to be pretty slim. In addition, Tonenke is mostly under Russian control. Some mappers are actually saying it's entirely under Russian control. I'm unsure of that as of now. Some people claim that Ukraine still maintains a small sliver of the town in the far western edge. Real quick, moving to the south, Russia is already making moves towards Novelske. There's actually been some reports today that Novelske, Russian troops have actually entered Novelske and captured 90% of the town, or I guess essentially the houses, leaving the barns and stuff under Ukrainian control. I'm unsure of that. The map updates that can confirm that the Russians have moved within striking distance in the fields in the south. So potentially we'll have an update on that in the next few days as well. Of course, it's just a small farming settlement, but it's vital position for the Ukrainians to defend in order to protect the northern flank of Krasnogorovka. As you can see here, the Ukrainians definitely don't want the Russians breaking out into these fields, to the north and creating a semi-encirclement of Krasnogorovka. That situation will not end well. All right, speaking of Krasnogorovka, I have no further updates on the situation here. Some sources claim that Russia has seized the entire southern edge of town, basically up to the rail line, so something like this. However, I do not see any kind of geolocatable or really even mapped out confirmation of that. So for now, this is what we know. My speculation is that Russians have seized this southern stretch of the rail line, the southeastern stretch of the rail line going into Krasnogorovka right here. That's just my speculation, but we have, no proof of that. Just kind of, this seems likely with the direction that Russian tanks entered into the city. All right, just a quick look up to the north. There are claims that Russia has entered both Makivka and Cherny. Once again, these are just claims. This is just speculation. There's no evidence that I have seen yet to confirm this. It's just a high number of propaganda sources or mapping sources, or various different rumors floating around that this is what's going on. I think it's likely that Russia is trying to enter these two settlements. There's certainly some other maps, like say the Deep State UA map shows that Russia is attacking in both these directions. So if I had to guess, the case is that Russia is trying to enter them. Perhaps we just have no confirmation yet, but like in the case of Robotny, which we're about to talk about, it's important to mark things as speculation or rumor before you know for sure. But we'll get to that in just a minute. Now, moving to the Zaporizhzhia front, I want to talk about the possibility of a Russian offensive here. But first, the movements and the setbacks. More sources are confirming the Russian land grab to the south of Gulyaipol. right here in this area. Small summer dachas is actually part of the city of Guliapol. It was in the gray zone. The Russians kind of moved in there without the Ukrainians putting up much of a fight. We have alleged Russian advances near Velnovo here. We also have some Ukrainian alleged counterattacks in the area, some claims that Ukrainians have taken back ground here, although my mapping seems to match up with the mapping showing the Ukrainian gains, so I have no changes there. And then we have Robotny. The Russians have suffered a setback. The town of Robotny, or the assault on Robotny, apparently has failed, and the Russians retreated back to their original positions, and Ukraine has taken back control over the town. The rumors of Ukrainian reinforcements deployed to the area appear to be true, and Ukraine has averted what would have been a huge PR disaster for the time being. Obviously, Robotny is an inconsequential village in its own, but it does sit on the road directly in the path of Orlivka, which could be a Russian summertime goal. And let's go ahead and get into that real quick. So there's a lot of talk about potential Russian summer offensive in this direction, and upon looking at the situation, I find that this assumption is not only viable but somewhat likely. Just at a glance at the map from bird's eye view, you could see, strategically speaking, most of the main arterial roads that connect the western parts of Ukraine to the east actually run to the south. So if we're looking here, you have a road that goes, through Dnipro. Another road goes through Dnipro. You have roads that go down and connect Zaporizhzhia. All these roads lead to the Donbass. In contrast, the northern route that goes through Kharkov, there's really only one road that connects this, and potentially a second road if you branch off of this. So when you're looking at the potential directions for a Russian offensive, one, outside of the current existing front line, a lot of people talk about Kharkov, right? So Kharkov has some value. Obviously, it's the second largest city in Ukraine, so it has enormous value like that. It's population pre-war around 1 million, and it's predominantly Russian speaking. So seizing Kharkov would obviously be a big prize for the Russian army. Not only that, but it would take some stress off of Belgorod, which has endured quite a bit of shelling throughout the war. Population there is under a bit of threat, and of course Ukrainian incursions into Shepkino as well. So comparing that to an offensive in the south, outside of seizing Kharkov, it doesn't really do anything for the rest of the war effort. That doesn't really affect the Ukrainian front line in Donbass too much. Ukraine could potentially lose Kharkov, but Russia would lose a lot of troops in the process of that and wouldn't be able to push the advantage anywhere else. It would basically create, say, a new front line, something like this. The Donbass front, Zaporizhzhia front would still exist. But should the Russians strike up from the south, seizing Orlivka, Guliapol, that closes off one of the logistics routes, gives the Russians a logistics advantage, and allows them to push up north, potentially cutting off another road and getting within striking and shelling distance of the other two. Probably this could probably be done relatively quickly based on the terrain. It's very flat, very open terrain. This is not like the Donbass front line where there's years of concrete fortifications that have been built up. There's a reason why Ukraine attacked in this direction, but there's also reasons why the Ukrainian attack failed and why the Russians probably haven't attacked yet. When you kind of zoom in on the area, the density of these roads is much lower, and according to people I've talked to from close from the region or on the ground, it seems like paved roads are very few and far between. So really, what you see in terms of the roads is what you get. So just not many logistic opportunities for either side in this situation. It really is all about Orlivka, Guliapol, Pologi, Tokmak. Each side holds 2 of these towns. If you hold all 4, you can probably take the region, but holding 2 of them can probably prevent the other side from making advances. So we'll see. The Russians have been building up rail lines, been building up, trying to work on their logistics in the area. Obviously, they held off the Ukrainian summer offensive, but it's tough to say what will happen with a Russian offensive. And just at least for the time being, it's important to say that I don't think this is in the cards anytime soon for the Russian army. They're pretty content with what's going on in Donetsk. They're making pretty solid and consistent gains. Why put that at risk? This is, their goal is to take the region of Donetsk, and they're achieving that goal at the current rate. And at the same time, the Ukrainian army is losing strength by the day. Now, if that continues and nothing changes for the Ukrainian army, and they get to a much weaker point than they are now, then the risks for the Russians associated with conducting a major, offensive operation, there's more reward than there is risk at that point. At this point, there's an immense amount of risk because they could waste, a lot of resources and give Ukraine more defensive opportunities and more longevity moving into the future. So, I don't see it happening anytime soon. This is more of a what if scenario. Like, if the Russians decide to conduct a major offensive, I find the southern direction to be very, very likely. Now, quickly addressing the political situation with Ukraine and NATO. Recently, the French President Macron made statements about the potential of NATO troops being deployed to Ukraine. There was a great deal of freak out about this. Um, Russia responded immediately by saying that they would declare war on NATO if this happened, but not to worry. Emmanuel Macron is full of shit. There will not be NATO troops deployed to Ukraine, or at least according to the leaders of Germany, Italy, Poland, Finland, the UK, the United States. Basically, everyone immediately came out and said, this is not going to happen. It seems like France's friends were a bit upset over this statement. Maybe it was some kind of political talk to try and influence public opinion for funding in Ukraine. I don't really know, but I don't really think there's much more to it. So, a lot of talk here, but nothing's going to happen. For Ukraine, Zelensky made a trip to Saudi Arabia, which has served as kind of an intermediary between Russia and Ukraine in the past. And according to the news, this was to propose a peace plan. Now, what Zelensky has said publicly, essentially delusional, and he's been doing a lot of that lately. His peace plan seems to involve all Russian troops withdrawing from Ukraine and Russia agreeing to pay war reparations. Obviously, that isn't going to happen. And it isn't even really a peace plan. It's basically offering terms for Russia's surrender. So, obviously, Russia is not losing the war at this point, and they're not going to do that. But I think that this is probably just a public stance. Keep up the PR environment that Ukraine's winning. Blah blah blah. Maybe different talks are happening behind the scenes. Who knows? Additionally, just to address it real quick, didn't really want to talk about this, but Zelensky made statements last week about Ukrainian deaths in the war now reaching 31,000 soldiers. Shouldn't have to explain why that's delusional and, slightly offensive to, the more than 31,000 mothers out there that are certainly, missing their children. But just kind of as a baseline, and this is very fascinating. The Wall Street Journal has recently done a report that between 20 and 50,000 Ukrainian wounded have undergone amputation procedures. These numbers compare to World War I, when 67,000 Germans and 41,000 British troops were amputated. Wall Street Journal also accurately points out that in World War I, medicine and surgery wasn't as advanced as it is today, so amputation was used far more often when it didn't need to be, when it doesn't need to be in modern medicine. So during World War I, the British Army had some 800,000 fatalities, and the Germans had over 2 million. So that is, all I will say about that. Of course, that being said, modern medicine is better, so there's probably a lot more Ukrainian wounded that are alive because of medicine that, didn't have limb-related issues. But at the same time, the numbers really don't match up. I mean, you're looking, it seems like if you add a zero to Zelensky's numbers, they're probably closer to what they are in reality. So that's all I'll say about that. I think in the next video, I will spend some time talking about economic situation of Russia and Ukraine at the end of the Frontline report. So keep an eye out for that. That is all from me today on this one. Until next time.